Hiya, my name's Pete, and this video is about the book that changed my life when it came to ADHD. This is a book, Driven to Distraction, and in this video, I want to give you the main reasons why I think it's a brilliant book for ADHD and why it personally changed my life. The book is by Edward Hallowell, and it's also by John Ratey. So I think Edward Hallowell wrote it, but John Ratey was his collaborator. And it begins with a series of case studies. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the case studies now and why they were helpful for me. The first case study in this book is called Case 1, and it's Jim. I'm not sure if that translates on camera. It might say Midge. And it's about Edward Hallowell's interactions with Jim as a client. And there's a bit where Edward Hallowell asks Jim, "How do you screw up?" And Jim says, "Well, I forget things. I argue, I postpone things, I procrastinate, I don't follow through. You name it, I do it. I get into these discussions with my boss and I'll see that my way is right. And the next thing you know, I'm losing my temper for not seeing that my way is right. Or I have an idea, but I won't be able to find it, like it's a jumble lost in the closet or something." And for me, when I read that I remember that really resonated, because that's sometimes how my head feels. Like I have an idea, but I just can't find it. It's just that jumble. So again, this was just a case study, but I remember reading this case study and thinking that's a bit like me. Case number 3 is somebody called Maria. And I just want to highlight one more of these. She says she did really well at university, but then in graduate school, she really struggled. And she said, "My problem is, I don't know whether I'm smart or I'm stupid. I've done well and I've done poorly. I've been told that I'm gifted and I've been told that I'm slow, and I don't know what I am." And then Hallowell is speaking to her and he says, "It is not unusual for people with ADD to have erratic, inconsistent educational histories," which really applied to myself. And I remember reading that and thinking, I have this educational history that was up and down, a lot of it not very good. And actually, later on, I did better. So, him and Maria are talking, and this is something that I think is really key. And I just wanted to highlight. She says, "One minute that I'm there, and then the next I'm not. I don't finish things, I get started, and then I drift off to something else. And then I've forgotten about what I started in the first place." So I think for me, reading these case studies, and there's more than Maria, there's more than Jim, but you start to build up a picture of ADHD and you start to relate to these stories. And this was the first book that I read that I really related to. And I'd read a lot of academic articles, different journals, but this really brought out that human side to me, where I started to go, actually, that makes sense. I think that relates to me. So the case studies right at the beginning of this book was a great way to start the book, and it was something that really stood out to me. The second thing about the book that is brilliant is that it's got a really good diagnostic criteria for ADHD. So I read through this diagnostic criteria and I instantly went, I get it. That makes sense to me. That's me. I ticked all the boxes. Now, this diagnostic criteria is not a copy and paste of the DSM. What's significant about it is it's two psychiatrists with a lot of experience who've got their heads together, and they've said, what is it we see in clients? So this is sort of presented as a mixture of academic research, but also their personal experience of working with clients. So it is 15 different things, and I've put a list of the 15 different things below. And I've also put a link to Driven to Distraction. So if you like the sound of the book, you can see about getting yourself a copy of it. But I've put the criteria that they outline below. And I wanted to read a little bit about anxiety that's included in this book, because I was very anxious when I read this. I had lots of problems with anxiety, and I thought this book kind of helped capture a bit of that and sort of give me some guidance. So the person with anxious ADHD often starts the day or any moment of repose by rapidly scanning his or her mental horizon in search of something to worry about. Once a subject of worry has been located, the individual locks in on it like a heat sensing rocket and doesn't let go. No matter how trivial the subject or how painful the worry, the individual keeps the worry alive, returning to it magnetically and obsessively. So this is, I mean, sometimes referred to as rumination, and I know in the book later on they talk about rumination, but this is that, like, the hyper focus, the obsessive bit of ADHD where you really intently focus on something, and then how that fits into anxiety. So when you get anxious, you worry about something, how intensely you can do that. And this was the first book that I thought really started to capture that human experience, where I became a bit more self-aware. I became a bit more understanding that actually, if I think of an idea that's negative, I can lock onto that idea and I can start to really ruminate on it. So this book was really key in unpicking that. The section on ADHD and depression is really good. And I want to read an extract of that just to give a sense of what they're talking about. Sometimes the first symptoms that a person brings up with ADHD is that the fact that they're depressed frequently. So this is not hard to understand when one considers the typical life experience of someone with ADHD. Since childhood, the person with ADHD has felt a chronic sense of frustration and failure, underachieving, accused of being lazy, stupid, stubborn, finding the demands of everyday life extraordinarily difficult to keep up with, tuning out instead of tuning in, missing the mark time and time again, and living with an overflow of energy, but an undersupply of self-esteem. The individual with ADHD can feel that it's just not worth it to try anymore, that life is too hard, too much of a struggle, and that perhaps it would be better if life were not to go on. And that section there, at the age of 22, 23, around that time, really captured just how much I personally was struggling. And I felt in that moment that I had a tribe in this book. I had found a group of people that shared some of the problems that I had. And that's why this book was so important. You know, you had the case studies at the beginning, you have that diagnostic criteria, but then it starts to unpack some of that emotion and some of that struggle that I felt. And I think that anybody who thinks that they might have ADHD would benefit from reading this book, because I think if you do potentially have it, there's a lot of things in here that might relate to you. And I think it'd be really, I think it's a great thing to read at the beginning. And I think the final thing I want to talk about is how compassionate and how positive this book is. Um, Edward Ratey, Edward Hallowell and John Ratey, they have ADHD. To the best of my knowledge, they both have ADHD, and there is a compassion and a kindness and care in this book, which you don't find throughout articles and literature on ADHD. It's not always there. And one of the things in here is that the whole final bit of the book really is all to do with things that are helpful. And they talk about things to do with structure and pattern planning. They talk about, you know, setting reminders, timers, alarms, to-do lists. And there is just a sincere amount of effort and a lot of integrity gone into how can I write a book that is going to help the reader? How can I do something which is going to help that individual that is struggling? That is why this book is brilliant. So I think if you're curious about if you've got ADHD and you want to look at the diagnostic criteria, if you're feeling anxious or depressed or have some other mental health struggles, this book is still very good at unpacking that alongside ADHD. And then it's got a whole section at the end where it looks at how do you then move forward. So what can you put in place that will help? And that's why it's fantastic. And I think at the end of this book, I felt like I had a tribe. I felt like I had a group of people that were out there who had similar experiences to me and got it, and I understood myself a little bit better. And overall, at the end of reading this, I felt really optimistic and hopeful. So it's a really thorough, really well written book with a lot of information in it, but it's written in a very kind and compassionate way. So that is why I think Driven to Distraction is the ADHD book that really changed my life. And the final note I want to end on, outside of how great this book is that on a practical level, this is the 1995 published version. Um, Even a cheap old second-hand copy of this, I think, is a great buy if you decide to get a book on ADHD. There are sort of more contemporary, up-to-date editions of it, which I think are worth the read. I have read Edward Hallowell's most recent book, so if you enjoyed this video and would like me to review his most recent book, let me know. But in terms of money and this being cost effective, even an old battered copy of Driven to Distraction, I would highly recommend. It is a fantastic book, and I will leave a link in the description to a copy of it. But yeah, thank you for watching this, and I hope it is helpful